There was just one thing I did want to ask, just about going back to the anthropology thing. A lot of the ways that we've talked about it's been west to east.
Yes.
Would there be a difference if we went north to south? I mean, would we?
To Bonnie Scotland, you mean?
Well, no, I'm just thinking
My
that.
ancestors.
Well,
Or are you thinking of further north than that?
I'm further. Well, I'm happy to go a bit further north, but I'm aware that kind of you can get these big cultural shifts if you look at the west, and then you go continental Europe, then you go to India, you go to China, and you get this huge difference. If you started, say, in the north, say, I don't know, Canada, and went down, and you looked at it from a north-south perspective, would you see a similar range of different cultures breaking out, or that's not actually how the cultures break down, historically or geographically?
Well, of course, that's exactly what Michael Palin did when he went from pole to pole. It was quite interesting seeing the way his vision shifted, because you obviously have to start up in Finland and Iceland and Greenland, which is what he did. And there, because I've been to Scandinavia a bit, but they don't seem very different. Scandinavia, basically, we're Scandinavians. We were settled by Scandinavians and people like that. So Scandinavia, you do not get much sense of a culture shock. As I've talked several times, you get a big shock when you get into continental Europe, and particularly southern Europe. But if, as he did, you go on down the Nile, or wherever it was, you then get, as I said, North Africa, which is Islamic and therefore at least monotheistic, and some overlap with my world. But Jack Goody's sub-Saharan Africa feels as different or even more different than going east, partly because it's going east, you're still usually in what we call civilizations. In other words, societies which for several thousand years have had writing and cities and advanced crafts and so on. If you look at, if you go around Africa, as they do sometimes in maps in museums, in the northern part, you get objects which are civilized, even the Benin bronzes, because that's high up in Africa. So you get bronze work and advanced crafts. The moment you drop down below the Sahara in Africa in a museum, you get very simple objects, things made of wood and mud and so on and so on. And Jack Goody was often very intrigued. Why in sub-Saharan Africa were the technologies so much simpler than the ones north of Sahara? So basically, northern Sahara is part of Eurasia to a certain extent, because the Silk Roads and the trading things through the Gulf and so on went up. And even parts of East Africa are part of the great sort of Eurasian trade routes and technologies. To the south, the social organizations historically have been much simpler. The people have been much more dispersed, living in large forests or across large deserts. And so their social organizations have been often very warlike, and the technologies have been much simpler. So I think there you would get a shock. You'd get basically the same shock as you get if you go to the Pacific, some of the parts of the Pacific. In other words, if you went to New Guinea, for instance, which to a large extent was cut off from Eurasia, and therefore everything seems to drop back by thousands of years to the pre-civilizational era.